Good evening, everybody. Thank you all so very much for joining us here today, or tonight, I guess it's evening now, with Woolsack Win. We are here to celebrate Margaret Nowachyk's memoir, Chasing Zebras, which is an absolutely fabulous book. We've had a couple of events with Margaret, and she is a wonderful reader, and a brilliant thinker. I'm Noelle Allen. I am the publisher of Woolsack & Win. For those who don't know you, I always forget to introduce myself at these things. I just figure nobody wants to know about the publisher. They want to know who the author is, and they want to get on to the interesting stuff. But I get to do the boring things at the beginning, like thank our funders. So thank you to the Canada Council for the Arts and to the Ontario Arts Council and the Department of Canadian Heritage. All of these different forms of support help us to bring out wonderful books every year. Tonight, we're going to have a lovely discussion between Margaret Nowaczyk and Rowan McCandless about, again, Margaret's memoir, Chasing Zebras. But before we start that, I am going to give a land acknowledgement. And we like to do this with all of our events. Even though they're virtual, we are still rooted in the city of Hamilton, and we'd like to acknowledge the importance of that. The city of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase, 1792, between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today, the city of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. I'd also like to share this acknowledgement for Rowan, as she is joining us from Winnipeg. Winnipeg is located on Treaty 1 territory, the ancestral and traditional homeland of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Dakota, Dene, Métis, and Ojibwe nations. For those of you who might find it useful, we have enabled captioning for this event. And please, later on at the end, we may have a few moments for question and answer. If you could put your questions in the question and answer box so that we don't lose them, I'd really appreciate it. I'm very bad at catching questions otherwise. In just a moment, I'm going to turn the evening over to Rowan and Margaret. But first, let me properly introduce you to these two talented authors. Rowan McCandless is the author of a mosaic memoir entitled Persephone's Children, which launched in October 2021 with Dundurn Press. In 2018, her short story, Castaways, was longlisted for the Journey Prize, and her essay, Found Objects, won the Constance Rook Creative Nonfiction Prize. In 2020, she won gold and was also an honorable mention in the one-of-a-kind category with the National Magazine Awards. Her fiction and creative nonfiction has been published in print and online journals such as The Fiddlehead, The Malahat Review, Prairie Fire, Room, The Nation, and in anthologies. And in the anthologies Black Writers Matter, A Harp in the Stars, and Tongues on Longing and Belonging Through Language. She is the creative nonfiction editor with The Fiddlehead. Born in Poland, Margaret Nowaczyk is a pediatric clinical geneticist and a professor at McMaster University and the DeGroote School of Medicine. Her short stories, essays have appeared in Canadian, Polish, and American literary magazines and anthologies. She lives in Hamilton, Ontario with her husband and her two sons. And I'll turn this over now to Rowan and Margaret.
Hi, everyone. It's a really very special evening tonight that I have the opportunity to celebrate Margaret and her wonderful book. I would wonder if in the chat, if people would like to let us know just where you're coming from. That would be a really good thing to share.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. And thank you for joining us.
So we have Toronto. Lots of congratulations coming in.
Chicago. Manchester, UK. Yay!
Congrats from Vancouver, more Toronto. more Vancouver,
Hi, Danielle.
Manitoulin
Maria.
Island. That's wonderful to see all the people sharing where they're
Thank you all so much for
coming
coming.
from.
Cześć.
Well, from Poland. So shall we begin our conversation, Margaret?
Sure.
Well, actually, first you're going to do a reading for us. I'm sorry, my mistake.
It's okay.
I got so excited that I just sort of got a little ahead of myself. So Margaret is going to read an excerpt from her book, Facing Zebras, a memoir of genetics, mental health, and writing. So enjoy, people, as Margaret gives us our reading tonight.
Thank you, Rowan. So as the subtitle says, it's a memoir of many things. And I have picked a selection of fragments that illustrate one of the arcs of the story that's not even mentioned in the subtitle. And that has to do with language, which has been a bane of my existence in Canada and has been a deliverance for me as well. It starts many, many years ago when we first arrived in Canada. On our third day at the Waldorf, which was also third day in Canada, my mother sent me to buy lunch. Go right from the hotel, she told me, cross 3 streets. The concept of city blocks does not exist in Poland. Then turn right on Yonge Street, the busiest street. You'll see a big yellow M sign. I completely missed Yonge Street and the Golden Arches and lumbered along Charles Street almost as far as University Avenue before I decided that a street lined with old stone buildings nested amidst tall linden trees was no place for fast food restaurants. Little did I know that 2 years later, I would be admitted to Victoria College and get to enter those stately portals. Shamefaced, I backtracked and located Yonge Street after what felt like hours. The McDonald's there exuded its signature deep fried reek. I grew wistful, remembering the same aroma from Baltic seaside restaurants during childhood holidays. I took my place at the end of the single line, snaking out from 4 cashiers. After years of lining up for food in Poland, I was a pro. Except that in Poland, there would have been 4 separate lines, and those condemned to the slowest would look daggers at the lucky ones who moved along to secure their goods. By comparison, this was the height of civility. The single line feeding into 4 sales points impressed provincial immigrant me. When I reached the counter, my eyes settled on the silver flashing between the salesgirl's pink lips. Metal wires caged her top and bottom teeth. The previous summer in Poland, I had read The Godfather. Now I flashed back to Connie Corleone's wired jaw, broken by her no-good husband, Carlo. This poor girl's jaw must be broken, I thought. My heart beat widely at such a crass display of Western degeneration. Eyes fixated on her mouth, I haltingly ordered 3 cheeseburgers. I was speaking English in Canada for the first time. Do you want French fries with that? She asked, metal flashing. No, not French fries, I said, just fries. I did not know what French fries were. The counter girl shrugged, stepped back to pick up 3 oily red pockets from under the heater and dropped them on the tray in front of me. I checked the contents. Yes, those were the kinds of fries I wanted. That's it? The girl asked. I had no idea what she meant. I beg your pardon? Is that it? I shook my head, my cheeks burning hot. Is this all you want? The man standing behind me prompted. Relief. Yes, I said, yes, that is all I want. I paid for the order, barely able to tear my eyes from the girl's mouth, and squeezed through the crowd feeling stupid and deflated. So fast forward a few years. In my enforced English muteness, I missed telling jokes the most. Those one-line zingers that I had been notorious for back in Poland. I tried once in high school, but I mispronounced lunatic so badly that my grade 12 biology classmates stared at me, bemused. A year later, having heard the word jerk on the Love Boat, I tried to use it ironically, but the expression on my interlocutors' faces made it clear that I had once more botched the delivery. Several years later, when I attempted a pun that went over like a lead balloon, a colleague snarked, "It's obvious that English is your second language." But by then, I could snap back. Actually, it's my third. For years, English remained a type of a code. It carried a one-to-one correlation with objects and abstract concepts, like an old-fashioned cable might, but it had no shades of gray, no overlaps between words. Only when I witnessed my sons learning to speak it did I realize that English was as organic as Polish. One could have fun with it just as I used to in my native tongue. Hearing my son say pitch white or Germanese, or telling me to stop colding him when I touch his belly with my icy cold hands, taught me more about English than years of speaking it. After many years on the borderlands of English, I finally have fun with it too. Now my delivery is so self-assured, people don't dare attempt to correct my neologisms. And this is 20 years later from that first moment when I was trying to buy French fries. At about that time, I had reached another important milestone in my life. One day that spring, I was speaking on the phone with John Opitz, who had by that time become a friend. He's a very famous North American geneticist. I was discussing a young man with whom I had diagnosed with FG syndrome. We were winding down after discussing the patient's management, and John had asked in his gravelly voice, heavy and Germanic, "Do you speak Polish?" A beat of hesitation, followed by a flash of insight and pride. And I heard myself say, "I'm bilingual." The aptness of the word stunned me. After so many years of being ashamed and embarrassed by my accent and my linguistic deficiencies, I finally found the right word to describe myself. For the first time in my life, I owned it. Thank you.
That was marvelous, Margaret. Thank you so much for that. What we're going to do now is move into our conversation, and I have so many questions that I'm eager to share with you. So the first question that I do have is titles are very important. And if you don't mind, can you share with us why Chasing Zebras?
Chasing Zebras harks back to first year in medical school. And this is an old adage that medical students are taught very early in their training. And it says, it's very simple, very simple. When you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. And let me explain what that means. As medical students, when we're learning all of this vastness of medical knowledge, we don't have the experience of knowing what's common and what's not common. And we frequently latch onto the very rare diseases because they're so interesting. But things like common cold or diabetes or pneumonia or broken bones are much more common than some of the fascinomas that we learn, that we study. So that's where it comes from. If you are in a house in Europe, where I think this originates from, if you hear hoofbeats outside the window, it's horse. It's not a zebra, right? But the issue is that in genetics, the diseases that I deal with are the rare once in a lifetime in a general practitioner's life types of diseases. So my life, actually, my professional life has been spent chasing zebras and trying to identify them and diagnose them. So that's where the title comes from.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it is a very suitable title for what you've written in your memoir. I wonder, did you always want to be a writer?
When I was little, I was a voracious reader, and I thought that writers were not regular people, that they lived on some kind of a they lived some kind of a rarefied existence on another plane above us mortals. So I never ever actually dreamt about becoming a writer. It was not, I mean, I wanted to be a chemist, a biochemist, an architect, an English professor. What else did I want to be? Those are not necessarily in that order. And throughout that, there was always wanting to be a doctor, but I never thought about being a writer. Maybe being an English prof would be the closest thing to it.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I didn't, because I didn't think it was within my reach. But I do remember thinking when I was about 25, saying to my husband, that was the first time I actually articulated it, I'd like to be a writer. And then about 10 years ago, or maybe 12 years ago, I actually started writing. So that's a long, long way from some people that start writing when they're kids. I did write my first play for 2 puppets when I was 11, but that's about it. I was never very good at writing essays in school. It was one of the things I could never do.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting how, and I'm so fortunate that you did decide to become a writer and to write, because we get to read your marvelous work. So I'm so glad that you team and your journey through medical school and living with mental illness. I'm wondering, how did it feel to write about such personal subject matter?
Part of the reason why I was writing is actually sort of the second part of the book. It explains it, why I was writing, and that has to do with what we call in narrative medicine reflective writing, which is writing to figure yourself out a little bit. So the very beginning of the book, the prologue or the beginning, sort of starts with me realizing how beneficial, how freeing, how wonderful it is to be heard by writing something that, you know, is very difficult for you, that is kind of weighing you down, and to have people listen to you. I never felt heard until that moment that I describe in the book. And from then on, yeah, that was in 2010 or 2011. And then that's when I tried to start writing before that. Then I started writing more and more and more. Then I got my MFA. And during my MFA was when I decided that I think a memoir was the way to go, for the reason that I wanted to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
And writing about these difficult things and sharing them and having people pay attention was the reason why I write it. Was it difficult at times? You bet. It was very difficult. Some parts especially. And there were times where I wouldn't be writing for months, because I guess I would just be spent and then have to go back and work some more. So yeah, it was difficult, no question. But I wanted to be heard, so I kept going.
Yeah, that's a very familiar refrain with a lot of writers, that they wanted to get their stories out, that they wanted to be heard, that they wanted to share what they had inside of them in terms of past experiences and just their thoughts on life. So I'm really appreciative that you decided to do the deep dive and write your memoir, because it certainly is, well, it's one of my favorites. It's now on my shelf with my favorite books. So I'm very glad you wrote it. Another question that I have is, from conception to publication, what was the journey like while writing Chasing Zebras?
So it's actually started in my MFA class. In my third year of it, so when I started my MFA in 2014, my plan was always to graduate with my thesis being a collection of short stories, fiction. And I was writing, and I enrolled in a number of fiction classes, but the MFA program at UBC requires you to take three genres, three different sort of subspecialties or in creative writing. So mine was fiction, creative nonfiction, which was also sort of had some inkling towards and translation. And when I did my first CNF class with Wayne Grady, my amazing mentor, it was actually a short cross-section, so to speak, of the transformation that is sort of the backbone of the book, which I won't talk about here because I want you guys to read it in the book. But it was a short essay type of a thing, 5,000 or 6,000 words, 4,000 words. And people really liked it. My classmates, when we were workshopping, and they really liked it. And that was in 2016, 17. One of those 2 years. And I asked them, I still remember asking, do you guys think that there's enough material there for a full-length memoir? And it was a resounding, yes, absolutely. So that was in September, because I was one of the first people to be workshopped. That November, I did NaNoWriMo, the novel writing month, where you're supposed to sit down and for 30 days produce 50,000 words. Of a novel, but I decided to do my memoir. By the end of, I started November 4th or 5th. And by November 30th, I had 65,000 words of a draft.
That's amazing.
It just came out. It all just came out. And I was amazed, because I was sitting there and I said, okay, I think, and that's when I switched my thesis. I said, my thesis is going to be my memoir. And then from then on, I've been working on this as my thesis. It was another year. And then in 2018, I finished my MFA with this as my thesis. And then what did I do? Then I talked to Noelle, and Noelle wanted to see it. And I didn't actually shop it around very much. I did shop it around, but not very much. And Noelle was always interested in it. And then she got the manuscript, she read it, and she said, yes, I'd publish it. And here we are. Great. Yeah, it was wonderful. It was wonderful to find such a great home as Woolsack and Win for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what you are currently reading.
No, that's a little silly. What am I currently reading? No, sorry. Oh, what am I currently reading? Sorry, I thought you were asking me about my favorite writers. I'm actually reading, I started another project, and I am reading books in that genre, trying to see what they fit. And from the beginning of the pandemic, I have been reading so much because I couldn't been writing. I've been reading so much that I can't even remember. But the one that I'm reading right now is Smilla's Sense of Snow, which is a thriller that came out about 25 years ago and was a huge best-selling hit. And I'm just making my way through that. It's one of those Scandinavian noir, Nordic noir thrillers. I'm trying to figure out whether I like it or not. But I'm going to make my way through it. Yeah. I also am going to be dipping into the English translation of the Books of Jacob by my favorite Polish writer that won the Nobel Prize in 2018. It's a huge, almost 1,000 pages tome that took 5 years to translate, took 10 years to write and 5 years to translate. So I'm sort of dipping into that. And I am looking at some craft books. There's one called that somebody just recommended recently. It's called The Science of Story, or Science of Storytelling, which is really interesting because it looks at neurophysiology of storytelling and story receiving, which is really
fascinating.
Yeah. So those are the three things that I'm dipping into right now.
Yeah. thought you were frozen there just for a moment.
No, I wasn't. Yeah, this is what you do at Zoom. You go, and people think you're frozen, but you're like, no, I wasn't frozen. I was just thinking. So no, that's what I'm reading right now.
Mhm. Well, in conjunction with reading, we can talk about writers. Who are some of your favorite writers that inspire you?
So I would give my two front teeth. I would, for any good short story, and they're short story writers, my favoriteest ever is George Saunders, for his kindness, for his quirkiness, for his language, and just the amazing stories that he comes up with. Some of them are sort of futuristic, speculative, but still very human. Some of them are just weird and still very human. Some of them just have two protagonists, and some of them have hundreds of protagonists, and he just does such an amazing job in a very short period, very short space, which is a short story. So George Saunders. Olga Tokarczuk, whom I mentioned already, who is a Polish writer. I've been reading her for a long, long time. And that's the shelf with her books. And then I do like Margaret Atwood. And I think of her recent books, the one that I liked the most was Hagseed. It was just hilarious. I'm not too big on the speculative sort of dystopian stories of hers, but that one was just so funny. And it's this quintessential Atwood sardonic wit. It's just like I was just busting them out of my seams laughing. Those would be, and then there's one more Polish one that it hasn't been translated into English. Many of his translations have been in German, and lots of others. I don't think I can come up with too many right now because it's just sort of like a bit of a whirl in my head right now. But yeah, I would say George Saunders, bar none, Margaret Atwood, Olga Tokarczuk. Those would be my top three.
George Saunders is one of my favorites as well, for this very same reasons.
Oh yeah, I remember we were talking about one of your stories and about him, and yes, I remember that. Yeah.
So speaking of stories, how did you navigate the telling of your patients' stories?
That is a very good question, and it is a question that I did not take lightly at all. There are in my book real life stories. There are 2 or 3 that are composites, fictional composites, simply because I didn't have a particular one story to illustrate a point, but the vast majority of them are real stories. Now, I do not give names. Well, I give first names. I always have permission from the parents when I do use the names. I've contacted them. I have verbal permission, consent. The main patient that is sort of another backbone, part of the backbone of the story. The parents actually have read the whole memoir even before it went to printing, even before I said, yes, we're going to printing and we're doing this. As I was writing it, I knew that I could not go any further. I couldn't go any further in writing it unless I had these particular parents on board, because she was so instrumental in my life and in my transformation. If they said no, there would have been no memoir. Because
that's very interesting.
Yeah, no, that was the story that I wanted to tell. Could I have written it differently? Yes, but it wouldn't have been the story that I wanted it to be.
Right.
So Shannon has and Shane have been on board from about halfway through my writing process, and they've read it. They've come to my in-person launch, which was in December at the Art Gallery of Hamilton. It was wonderful to see them. And many of the other, there was also another, anyway, so yeah. So when I couldn't reach, there was one patient I couldn't reach because it was from 30 years ago, 25 years ago. I changed a lot of things, and then sort of put a composite of many patients into that one.
Okay.
But 95% of them, except for that one, I have contacted the parents, asked their permission, asked their consent, and it was given.
Was it difficult to reach out to the parents, or did you find that that was a generally easy thing to do? Speak to the parents about the book.
Many of the patients that I write about, I have had a long-standing relationship with. Like, I've been following those kids who are now young adults for years.
Mm-hmm.
Was it difficult? It was difficult to reach that one particular patient,
Right.
because of what it did to me in my life first, before things changed in my head and in my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that they had to know that. And they knew it. They knew it way back when, even as life was going on, you know.
Mm-hmm.
They could see that what I was going through. So when I came, so it was hard for me to reach out to them, but I knew I had to.
Mm-hmm.
The other ones was a lot easier. And again, they were not as pivotal to the story. So I knew that if they said, no, we don't want you to put us in your book, I would have said, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But that one particular patient was pivotal. The whole story hangs on my relationship with her.
Mm-hmm.
So that was hard, because I was afraid that they would say no. But I had to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I had to do it, and it worked out.
And I'm so glad that it did.
Yeah.
So that we have your wonderful book for everyone to read and enjoy and to contemplate, because there's much to contemplate in your book, I found. So moving away from the book a bit, I was wondering, what have you found were the greatest benefits of writing your memoir?
I'm not frozen, I'm thinking.
Yeah.
It was mainly facing myself, is probably the best way of saying it, or getting to know myself. But actually, no, I'm sort of envisioning it as like, I'm looking at myself in the mirror and I'm seeing myself for the first time, or seeing myself differently, and changing my own perception of myself. Number one, my own perception of certain patients and certain situations, professional situations, and of the world. You know, the small part of the world that is my part of the world. So were there huge epiphanies? Maybe one big one. There were a lot of little stars coming up as I was going. I'm going, oh, you know. So those things, figuring some things out. It really helped me figure a lot of things out, and it was a process of, you know, I mean, we're talking when I started writing was 2007. So we're talking a long time. When I first started writing, so but starting the memoir was then, but some of the writing was sort of already happened, that sort of found its way into the memoir was happening before that. So yeah, I think finding myself, or facing myself with some of my warts and wrinkles and faults and foibles and stuff like that, and sort of owning them.
Yeah, that is very much the case, I find, with memoirs, that you are giving this image of who you are as a person, and in the writing that you're discovering not only the story but yourself, and just
absolutely
how important that is, and also just how it can lead to so many wonderful discoveries about oneself.
Yeah, for sure. That definitely was a major side benefit of writing it. I mean, this is the product, but there are many side benefits
Right.
from it. Yeah.
Another question that I have for you is, did it ever feel difficult writing your memoir? And if so, how and why did you keep going?
I never felt that it was difficult to write it, but I would just stop writing. So it's I know it's I wouldn't sit there and go, oh, it's so difficult to write, but I'm going to keep on writing. I would just stop.
Mhm.
Okay. And it would be months, even after it's gone to publications and we were doing edits and stuff. There would be months where it would just be languishing and there was hanging over my head. And it's like, oh my God, I have to do it, but I don't feel like it. And then in the end, you just had to do it because you signed a contract, because people were depending on you. That
Mhm.
was big. It was a part of it, a big part of it. But the big part was you wanted your story out.
Yeah.
What was really making it difficult for me was that as I was doing revisions, I kept on seeing almost with every sentence, with every paragraph, how I could make it so much better,
Mhm.
but I didn't have the time anymore. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, oh,
Yeah.
I could put this here, I could put this here. I did some really big revisions and changes while we were working on it. But then
Mhm.
there were so many. I mean, I read it now and I just, oh darn, I could have done this differently. So that was a difficult part as well, in addition to just the fear of putting it out there, but also like, oh darn, I could make it so much better, but I haven't. You know that feeling, don't you?
I
You're so
know that
anxious, you
feeling.
know
Yeah.
that feeling.
I know
Yeah.
it exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. And then you just have to get through it and you say, okay, this is the best I can do. I only have, X hours in the day to do it. And you got to get it done and figure out what's the most important thing. And then the one thing that I really am glad I did, it was like at the 11th hour.
Mhm.
Actually, it wasn't 11. It was 11:58 when I
Okay.
sat down and I said, okay, I have to give it to Noelle by Monday. I am going to read it out loud, the whole thing. And it was so important that I did it because I picked up so many things still in there. So if anybody is doing the last edit should be reading it out loud, sitting at your desk, in your room, and reading it out loud so you can actually hear the things, and
Right.
maybe even not doing it as the very last thing, because
That-
it might have been maybe a little bit late, but
Mm.
I'm glad I did that.
Yeah.
So that's a piece of advice that I would share with anybody writing a long project. Read the
Mhm.
whole thing out loud.
Yeah, that's an excellent idea. That's not something that I did with my memoir. I would read the essays as they were composed and then go
Mhm.
back and read
Mhm.
them. But that's very good advice that you have in
Yeah.
terms of
And it
writing.
sort of makes you go through it one last time,
Yeah.
because at least you're reading it and you've got a bit of an anchor, a physical anchor, your voice, to just get through it and not skip and whatever. So that was really I'm really glad I did that.
Well, I'm so glad, and we're also glad that you did.
Hmm.
So that we have this. I'm going to hold it up again just because I love it so. Facing Zebras, Memoir of Genetics, Mental Health, and Writing. It's just one of my favorites, Margaret. I'm just so glad that you wrote this book.
Thank
It
you, Rowan.
really was a delight to read. So we've kind of gone through our conversation.
I
That part.
could probably maybe read. I don't know whether we should go to Q&As or maybe I could read another piece. What do you think?
I would love if you could read another piece.
Okay. Let me just find it. Okay. This is a little bit different. And it's short. So just sort of like a little bit of an ending. One evening in early December 1999, before I started my meds, I drove to the Sydenham Lookout in Dundas. I had been driving a lot that winter, fast and without purpose, just to feel the engine roar under my foot, to see the landscape blur on either side of the road. At the lookout, I pulled into the parking and turned off the ignition. The sun had set behind my back, and the black silhouettes of steel mills and chimneys laced the southern horizon across the Burlington Basin. Lights blinked and flashed along the towers and smokestacks, along rooftops and chutes. They twinkled against the cobalt blue sky behind them and sparkled on the mauve and purple streaks above. Steam billowed from smokestacks as if sped onward by time-lapse photography. It fluffed, expanded, moved on. The harbor glimmered at the foot of the scene, reflecting the beauty of this spectacle of shimmering factories. I had never realized how startlingly beautiful the Hamilton industrial skyline was. How magical, how fabulous. I stared at it until darkness fell and the panorama ahead turned into a toss of glittering diamonds across the skyline, indistinguishable from the real stars in the firmament and the reflections over the water. At that moment, my lens rendered even the dingy, dirty industrial Hamilton Harbor beautiful and important.
That's lovely.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for reading that. So evocative, just wonderful. So I think we have some time now to move into a bit of a Q&A with our people in attendance. So I'm going to turn that over to Noelle to do the Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much, Rowan and Margaret. That was a lovely discussion and great readings, and I enjoyed every minute of it. We've got a couple of questions that are in the Q&A right now. So I'm going to read those, but if anybody else has any questions they'd like to ask, could you please put them in the Q&A section, and then we will get to them for you. So one of the questions that came up is from Eva, and she asked, what made you decide to do an MFA while being a professional scientist? Which is a good question. That's an awful lot of work.
Well, that's kind of the way I do things. I need a stick. I decided to be a writer in 2007. I started writing. I started to take creative writing courses. And then I said, well, let's see if I can get myself into an MFA. Because for me, and I know there's a lot of debate about it, and I don't want to get into that debate, but there's I wanted to see, was I good enough? Was my writing good enough? So that was the question. And then once I got into the grad program, I just kept going with it. I did it part-time over 4 years, and I did it at UBC, which offers an optional residency program. So I did everything online and then I went to the residency in Vancouver 3 times. And it was wonderful. I enjoyed meeting all the people that I would have never come across in my life. As a physician, from so many different walks of life, from so many different backgrounds, from all over the world. It was so broadening. My mind just went ooh, and it was amazing. So it wasn't just that I was learning to write. I was learning so much more than just to write. So it was just great. Why did I do it? Because I wanted to, because it was there. I don't know.
Makes sense. And Eva did have another follow-up question. She was wondering why you're reading the Book of Jacob in English and not in Polish.
Because I have already read it in Polish. And I want to check out what the translation is like. When I was in I mentioned translation class in my MFA, and actually what I did for that translation class was I picked up 4 pieces of the books of Jacob and translated them myself into English. It just so happened. It was before she won the Nobel Prize. It was before anybody really knew much about her. I loved the book so much. I wanted to share it with my classmates. So I have these 4 pieces that I've translated myself. So now I've read the books of Jacob in Polish a few years back, and now the book just came out in English. So I'm just kind of doing a little bit of.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm actually.
Language and translations and bilingualism and all that kind of stuff. I am totally fascinated by that. Yeah.
And so Cassia has also asked us, what are you working on right now?
I have started a new project, and it's I've always wanted to, my short stories were going to be literary stories. Then I went into the MFA, I went into CNF and a memoir. So I changed from that. And now I am actually, I'm writing, well, I started 2 weeks ago writing a novel. And it's something that I have been, it's a thriller. Okay, it's a thriller. And it's a thriller that I have actually thunk up literally 22 years ago. The premise for it popped in my head 22 years ago, and I couldn't make it work until about 2.5 weeks ago. I had 2 brainwaves that changed 2 things completely, to the point that it's actually now doable, manageable. And I think I have a story that I can tell, and then maybe even sellable. We'll see. So that's what I'm working on right now. Fingers crossed, I'll keep writing it.
Perfect. I think a lot of people are going to be interested in reading it when it comes out.
It's a medical genetics thriller. Yes.
Most definitely. I think, yeah. So Cassia had another question. She was wondering, how do you find the time and energy to do all of this?
I have no social life. And my kids, now they are grown up. So, but before that, I had no social life. I don't go to the theater. I don't, theater, I meant to movies. I don't watch TV. I read, I write, and, I do my job. And that's how it works out for me. I need a lot of sleep. I'm not one of those people that don't sleep. I'm not Napoleon on 4 hours of sleep a night. I need a lot of sleep. So it's not one of those things. That's not one of those quirks. Yeah, I think basically we have no social life. We don't. My husband's the same way. He just does his work and his music.
Makes sense. And I have another one from Eva. And she really wanted to know what your other favorite Polish author was.
Oh, Twardoch. Szczepan Twardoch is a writer from a Polish minority. They don't like to be called Polish minority. He's very adamant about it. From the part of Poland where I'm actually from, called Silesia, and there's a very strong minority movement of Silesians. They don't want to, long story, political, let's not go there. But he has written some absolutely amazing magical realism books, as well as some really great realism books set in the interwar Poland. One of his books, Drach, absolutely blew my mind. And I know a number of other people who really love them. I don't think he's been translated into English. He has been translated and is very popular in German.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't think we have any more questions, so I may just close this, and we're getting pretty close to time here. We're timing this quite nicely. So I'm going to ask you one last question. And it's what I asked you when we were working on the book too. So when somebody's read this book, what do you hope they get out of it?
Two things. One is that I do want people to appreciate what geneticists do, because geneticists as a subspecialty, I mean, even other medical doctors have no idea what we do and how hard we work and how difficult it is. So I want that. So that's for my medical colleagues, for my medical peers, to appreciate that. I mean, the people that I work with closely, obstetricians, neonatologists, some pediatricians, neurologists, do know what we do. But at large, internists, surgeons, well, let's not talk about surgeons, they're a different breed, but they don't know what we do and what use we are. Some of them consider us pretty useless. So that was a big part of it, showcasing what geneticists do and what clinical genetics is all about. And the other big one is how writing is important, how writing was important for me to appreciate the sort of, what's the word? How writing was helpful to me to maintain my humanity in this very difficult practice that I do. And how there are resources that we can do, like picking up his pen and paper and writing, that can be helpful. And that, you know, by appreciating the humanity of the doctor at the other side of the stethoscope, and admitting our own humanity will make us better doctors. So I think that's sort of the other message there. Those are the two messages.
Well, I think those are both very important messages. And I may be biased, but I think you got them both across very, very well in the book.
Thanks.
And I don't think I see any more questions, and we're very close to an hour. So I think we are going to say thank you all to our audience for joining us from across the globe, really. And thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Rowan, for a great discussion, reading a wonderful evening on a cold winter's night. This is a fabulous way to cut together, even if we're all remotely. These always feel warm, these events, even though we're not in the same room. So, but again, thanks to everybody. Wait.
Oh yeah,
Margaret?
I think Jennifer put down what I was supposed to say. So for those of you who haven't bought my books yet, for being here, if you are going to buy it from Walsack and Wynn, I will promise you that I will sign it for you personally. So if you haven't bought it yet, I would be very happy to go to the publishing house and sign it personally for you.
Just put a little note in the form saying that
Yes.
you were at the event and you would like a signature, and we will make sure that all happens. And I think with that, I'm going to say good evening to everybody. And again, thank you all for coming out and sharing this wonderful night with us.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rowan,
you.
so much. Heart goes out.
Oh,
Thank
so
you.
welcome.
Thanks, Noelle.
You're welcome.
Good
Thanks
night.
again. Good night.
Night.